In this build, we're making a bench using 3 different types of wood and 3 bell-shaped legs. We'll be doing some edge gluing with walnut, poplar, and zebra wood, and clear coating the woods to bring out their natural colors and grain. We started by ripping our boards down using a table saw. The lumber shop was nice enough to plane them all to the same thickness for us. This makes it easier to create a smooth bench top and base without a ton of sanding. We cut different widths for each of the 3 woods that we're using for the bench top. The base will have a center panel that's a little bit wider than the 2 sides based on where we're attaching the bell-shaped legs. We used a miter saw to cut our boards down to similar lengths. Since we'll be cutting them again after edge gluing, we were careful to allow some extra room. With everything cut, we were ready for edge gluing. We laid our boards out along several bar clamps that we had elevated off the floor with 4x4s. We began by turning all of the board edges up, then applied a thin layer of wood glue. We found it helpful to apply a thin layer and then add more as needed. We used a brush to smooth everything out evenly. Having a rag nearby can help, if needed, to wipe up any excess glue. Turning the edges of the boards back down, we pressed the edges together. We used 2 cauls that we had cut from scrap wood to align the edges of the boards flush. Then we began tightening down our clamps to join the boards securely together. We also placed the cauls along the tops and bottoms of the boards to distribute pressure evenly. Once the glue had dried, we removed the cauls and clamps and used a chisel to gently scrape away some excess glue. We repeated this process for our bench base. You may not even need a base depending upon your design and the thickness of your bench seat, but it's easy to create one if you like. Apply a thin layer of glue to the board edges, then press them together tightly using clamps and cauls. When the glue is dry, remove your cauls and clamps and use a chisel to scrape away any excess glue. We used a circular saw to trim the edges flush on our bench top and base. This is really easy to do when you clamp your board to your work surface and use a straight edge as a guide. We used a tape measure and speed square to position a level perpendicular to our board. We set the level tightly in place using one-handed bar clamps. We placed the edge of our circular saw along the level and simply followed it as a guide to make our cut. With both of our panels cut to size, we got to work sanding. We used an orbital sander and sanded from coarse to fine using 80, 150, and 220 grit sandpaper. We spent some extra time sanding along the joints to ensure everything was even and smooth. Then we used denatured alcohol to clean away the dust once we were done sanding. With our panels cut and sanded, we used wood glue to join the 2 together. We centered the base using a tape measure and made pencil markings to use as a guide. Then we spread a thin layer of glue across the surface, adding more glue towards the center of the panel and spreading it out evenly with a brush. We turned the base over, lined it up, and added cauls to press the panels together. We applied wax to our bell-shaped legs to protect the raw steel from rust. You can skip this step with our color powder coats or clear finish. We applied a thin coat of satin wipe on poly to our bench base, wiping it from end to end for a smooth finish. We used hex head screws and washers to attach our bell-shaped legs, first pre-drilling holes to help prevent the surface from cracking. We used a socket adapter to drive the screws through the slots and into the pre-drilled holes. Once the legs were attached, we turned the bench over and used a rag to clear coat the bench top. When everything was dry, we took a seat and enjoyed our bench.